They called her the Mop Lady.
It wasn't creative, nor was it meant to be. It was a label of dismissal, a verbal shorthand that rendered her invisible. For 5 years, Anya Sharma had been a ghost in the hallowed halls of Metropolitan General Hospital's prestigious surgical wing. She was the silent figure who appeared after the chaos, wiping away the literal and figurative messes left by the gods in scrubs. Her uniform was a faded grey, always clean, but perpetually worn, much like the expression on her face. Her movements were economical, a quiet efficiency that went unnoticed, the gentle swish of her mop, a part of the hospital's ambient hum, as ignorable as the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. They saw the slight, almost imperceptible limp in her right leg, a subtle dragging she tried to mask, and filed it away as another piece of evidence for a life unremarkable, a body worn down by thankless labor. They didn't know. They didn't know that the hands holding the mop handle had once clamped a severed femoral artery shut for 72 minutes straight, waiting for a dust-off in the Korangal Valley. They didn't know that the quiet, raspy voice that would only ever utter, "Yes, sir," and "Sorry, sir," had once commanded a team of frantic medics through a mass casualty event, her words a beacon of calm in a symphony of screams and explosions. They didn't know that the limp wasn't from age or fatigue, but from the hot shrapnel of an IED that had claimed the rest of her team and ended a career they couldn't possibly fathom. Dr. Adrian Thorne, the reigning deity of cardiothoracic surgery, certainly didn't know. To him, Anya was less than a ghost. She was a piece of the building's infrastructure, a function, not a person. He was everything she was not, loud, luminous, and dripping with the kind of manufactured prestige that came from a good tailor and a better publicist. He moved through the halls like a shark, trailed by a pilot fish school of fawning residents and nurses who laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. This afternoon, he was particularly pleased with himself. A complex aortic valve replacement, a so-called textbook case he'd narrated for the observation gallery like a celebrity chef on a cooking show. He strode out of OR2, peeling off his green scrub cap and running a hand through his perfectly coiffed dark hair. He was talking to Nurse Brenda, his most devoted sycophant, about a potential feature in a glossy magazine. Anya was there, as always. She had just finished disinfecting the floor of the scrubbing area, the antiseptic scent of her cleaning solution sharp and clean in the air. The linoleum gleamed under the harsh overhead lights, a perfect, sterile surface. Dr. Thorne, gesturing grandly to emphasize a point, took a careless step backward. His expensive, custom-made loafer, the one he wore to and from the locker room, came down squarely in the middle of her still damp floor. He didn't slip, but a small arc of greyish water splashed up onto the pristine white leather. He stopped. The hallway for a moment seemed to hold its breath. Thorne looked down at his shoe, his handsome face twisting into a mask of theatrical disgust. He looked up, his eyes the color of cold slate, finally landing on Anya. It was the first time he had made direct eye contact with her in months. "Are you blind?" he snapped, his voice echoing in the corridor. Anya froze, her hands tightening on the metal handle of her mop. "Sir, Don't sir me," he barked, pointing a dramatic finger at his shoe. "Look at this. This is Bruno Magli. Do you have any idea what that means? Of course you don't." He let out a short, cruel laugh. "You are paid to clean up filth, not to create it. You are literally a part of the grime in this hospital." Nurse Brenda giggled, a high, nervous sound. A few other staff members shuffling by slowed their pace, watching the spectacle. Anya's face remained a blank slate. Her gaze was fixed on a point just over his shoulder. Inside her, a switch was flipped. The sterile smell of the hallway was suddenly replaced by the coppery tang of blood and the hot dust of a Kandahar summer. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, flashed behind her eyes. A screaming Black Hawk rotor, the rhythmic grit of sand blowing against her teeth, the weight of a dying man in her arms. She forced it down, burying it deep in the place where she kept all the other ghosts. "I apologize, Doctor," she said. Her voice was a low, even monotone. "I will be more careful." Thorne scoffed, enjoying the audience. "See that you are. Some people are born to make messes, and some are born to clean them up. Try to remember which one you are." He turned on his heel and swept away, his entourage trailing in his wake, leaving Anya standing in the middle of her perfectly clean, now marred floor. A young intern, new to the rotation, looked at her with a flicker of sympathy before hurrying off. Another nurse whispered to her colleague, just loud enough for Anya to hear. "God, poor old mop lady. I wonder what her story is." The other nurse, a woman who had worked there for 10 years, laughed dismissively. "What story? There is no story. Some people are just born to scrub floors." Anya didn't react. She took a deep breath, the antiseptic smell returning, chasing the phantom sand from her lungs. She dunked her mop back into the bucket, the water sloshing, and began to erase the smudge. Her movements were the same as always, precise, efficient, and utterly invisible. But today, the pressure in her chest felt different. It wasn't just the dull ache of memory. It was the slow, cold burn of a promise. A storm was gathering, and the gods of Metropolitan General had no idea they were standing in its path. The rhythm of the hospital was a relentless, pulsating thing, measured in beeps, drips, and the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes on polished floors. Anya Sharma existed in the spaces between those beats. She was the silence in the corridors at 3 a.m., the unseen hand that restocked the paper towels, the fleeting presence that emptied the biohazard bins before the sun rose. She moved through the world of healing like a phantom, her existence acknowledged only by its effect. A clean surface, an empty trash can, a refilled soap dispenser. She saw everything and was seen by no one. This vantage point gave her a unique, unvarnished view of the hospital's true workings. She knew which surgeons had a tremor in their hands that they hid with bravado, which nurses watered down the coffee in the staff room, and which residents cried in the stairwells after losing a patient. And she knew, with a certainty that settled in her bones, that Dr. Adrian Thorne was a dangerous fraud. She saw the signs everywhere. She would be cleaning a monitoring station outside the ICU, and overhear a junior resident anxiously mentioning a patient's dropping oxygen saturation levels. "I mentioned it to Dr. Thorne," the young doctor would whisper to a colleague. "He said it was just an artifact on the screen, probably a loose sensor." Anya, glancing at the waveform on the monitor through the glass, would see the subtle, telltale dip and recovery of early-stage pulmonary edema. It wasn't an artifact. It was a warning. Hours later, she would see the crash cart thundering down that same hall, and she would know. She never said a word. It was not her place. The sycophants who orbited Thorne were a constant source of background noise. Nurse Brenda, a woman whose ambition far outstripped her competence, was the worst. "He's being headhunted by Johns Hopkins, you know," she'd announced loudly in the break room, while Anya quietly wiped down the microwave. They're offering him a whole department. Of course they are. A man with his hands? They're not just hands, they're instruments of God. Then she would notice Anya, and, for the benefit of her audience, drop her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Can you imagine? Some people save lives, other people, well, she'd gesture vaguely with her coffee cup towards Anya. Takes all kinds to make the world go round, I guess. Anya absorbed the slights like a stone wall absorbs the rain. They pattered against her and slid off, leaving her unchanged on the surface. But inside, every drop was counted. Every insult was filed away. One afternoon, during a lull, a young, perpetually nervous intern named Ben was wheeling a complex-looking cart laden with sensitive neurological monitoring equipment down the main corridor. He was clumsy, his movements jerky with inexperience. As he tried to navigate a corner, the cart's wheel caught on a seam in the flooring. It wobbled violently, its towering mast of electronics tipping precariously toward a multi-million-dollar imaging machine parked against the wall. A collision was imminent. Ben froze, his hands outstretched uselessly, his eyes wide with horror. Anya was 20 feet away, mopping the entrance to an empty patient room. In the space of a single heartbeat, something shifted in her. She moved. There was no thought, only action. The slight limp she usually carried vanished. She took 2 fluid, powerful steps, her body low and balanced. Her mop, held in her left hand, became an extension of her arm. She didn't swing it wildly. She pivoted, using the momentum to whip the long handle around in a low, flat arc. The wooden end of the handle connected with the cart's runaway wheel with a sharp thwack. It wasn't a crude bash, it was a perfect, calculated redirection of force. The cart straightened instantly, settling back onto its 4 wheels a mere inch from the gleaming surface of the imaging machine. The entire event took less than 2 seconds. Ben stared, his mouth agape. He looked at the cart, then at Anya, who was already back in her spot, resuming her mopping as if nothing had happened. Her posture was the same. The limp had returned. Her face was a mask of placid indifference. He blinked, unsure if he had imagined the sudden burst of impossible grace and precision. It was like seeing a statue leap to life and then turn back to stone. He shook his head, chalking it up to a trick of the light, and hurried on his way, his heart hammering in his chest. Anya didn't even glance at him. Her shift ended at 7. She trudged to the basement, to the cramped, windowless janitor's closet that served as her locker room and sanctuary. The air inside was thick with the smell of industrial cleaners and damp rags. Tucked away on the top shelf, behind a stack of MSDS binders, was a dented, old-fashioned metal lunchbox. It was olive drab, the paint chipped and worn. She lifted it down, her movements tender. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed foam, was a single object, a tarnished, silver-colored insignia. It was a small, ornate dagger, superimposed over a pair of crossed arrows, the crest of the Army Special Forces. Below it, on a small metal bar, was another, smaller device, a caduceus, the symbol of the Medical Corps. It was a Special Operations Combat Medic badge, a decoration so rare most of the military had never seen one in person. Her thumb traced the sharp edges of the dagger. This was all that was left. This and the ghosts. She closed her eyes, the metallic scent of the badge filling her senses, and for a moment, she wasn't the mop lady. She was the ghost. And she remembered what it felt to be feared, to be respected, to be hope incarnate in the worst places on earth. She held the badge until the tremor in her hands subsided. Then she carefully placed it back in its foam bed, closed the lunchbox, and locked her past away for another night. Humiliation is a slow poison. It doesn't kill you all at once. It seeps into your blood, corrodes your spirit, and turns your own heart against you. Dr. Adrian Thorne was a master of administering it, dispensing it in carefully measured doses to those he deemed beneath him. For Anya Sharma, the dosage had been steadily increasing. The breaking point came not in the sterile quiet of a surgical corridor, but in the clatter and noise of the hospital cafeteria during the lunchtime rush. Thorne had just been featured in a local news segment about top doctors under 40. A small crowd of his admirers, Nurse Brenda, chief among them, had gathered around his table. He was holding court, his voice booming over the din, recounting a more dramatic, fictionalized version of his latest surgical triumph. The air around him was thick with sycophantic laughter and the smell of reheated lasagna. Anya was on the periphery, as always, her job during the lunch rush to keep the tables clean and the condiment stations stocked. She moved with her usual quiet invisibility, a grey wraith weaving between the currents of conversation and clanking trays. She was wiping down a table near Thorne's, her back to him, when his voice cut through the noise, specifically targeting her. "You, mop lady!" The cafeteria's ambient chatter seemed to dip. Anya stopped, her hand frozen over the table. She didn't turn around. "I dropped my pen," Thorne announced, his voice oozing with a kind of bored theatrical cruelty. "Be a dear and pick it up for me." She turned slowly. The pen, a sleek, offensively expensive Mont Blanc, lay on the floor by his feet. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Picking it up would require her to bend down, an act that always made her carefully concealed limp more pronounced and painful. He knew this. Everyone knew this. It was the point of the exercise. She began to move toward him, each step a small mountain to be climbed. The eyes of 20 people were on her. Some looked away, their faces tight with second-hand shame. Others, the ones in Thorne's inner circle, watched with greedy anticipation. She reached the table and began to lower herself, her right knee protesting with a dull, familiar ache. Her hand, the one that had sutured a human heart, reached for the plastic casing of the pen. Just as her fingers were about to close around it, a polished Italian leather shoe moved, covering the pen completely. Dr. Thorne's shoe. "Oh, careful now," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial stage whisper for his audience. "Don't get your grime on it. That pen cost more than your monthly salary." Laughter erupted from his table. It was sharp and brittle. Anya's hand, hovering inches from his shoe, began to tremble. It wasn't fear. It wasn't submission. It was a surge of pure, unadulterated rage, so hot and violent it almost choked her. The cafeteria faded away. The laughter became the cackle of enemy fire. The smell of lasagna became the stench of burning diesel. A memory, one she fought daily to keep buried, broke through the surface with brutal force. She's pinned down behind a ruined wall. Corporal Evans is beside her, bleeding out from a chest wound. 10 feet away, Sergeant Miller is exposed, trying to lay down covering fire, his leg shattered. She has one plasma expander, one set of hands. She can only save one. Evans is closer, his wound more immediately fatal. Miller is her friend, the one who taught her how to play poker. The screaming of the wounded, the whistle of incoming rounds, the impossible, monstrous choice. The feeling of absolute, soul-crushing helplessness. Her breath caught in her throat. The trembling in her hand was not the palsy of a janitor. It was the contained energy of a predator. She could break his ankle in a single, fluid motion, snap the fibula with the toe of her worn work boot. She could do it before he even had time to scream. The knowledge was a live wire in her veins, but she didn't. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, and when she opened them, the rage was gone, locked back in its cage. Her face was a placid mask once more. She looked at his shoe on the pen, then looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. There was nothing in her gaze. No anger, no fear, no pleading. Just a flat, empty stillness that was somehow more unnerving than hatred. Thorne's smirk faltered for a second. He hadn't expected this silent defiance. He had expected tears or fumbling. He lifted his shoe. Anya picked up the pen. She rose to her feet, her limp more pronounced now. She didn't wipe the pen on her uniform. She held it out to him, placing it directly into his waiting palm. Her fingers didn't brush his. She turned without a word and walked away, her mop and bucket abandoned by the table. The silence she left in her wake was deafening. The laughter had died in everyone's throats. Thorne looked at the pen in his hand as if it were a dead snake. He had won the battle, but the victory felt hollow, sour. He had tried to humiliate her, but somehow he was the one who felt diminished. Anya disappeared through the doors leading to the service corridors, leaving the entire cafeteria feeling vaguely ashamed and unclean. The catalyst arrived on a Tuesday, disguised as a routine procedure on a VIP patient. Routine, in a place like Metropolitan General, was a loaded term. It meant the procedure was common, not that it was simple. And when the patient was General Wallace, the retired but still immensely influential former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, routine was a fantasy. General Wallace was a living legend, a man whose quiet gravitas could silence a room full of politicians. He was at Metropolitan for a triple bypass, a procedure Dr. Adrian Thorne had lobbied aggressively to secure. Thorne saw it as the crown jewel of his career, a chance to operate on a national icon. He'd arranged for a small gallery of visiting surgeons to observe, and a hospital publicist was already drafting a press release. Anya knew who General Wallace was, not from the news, but from a dusty, sun-bleached afternoon in Bagram. He had been visiting the front lines and had personally pinned a bronze star on a young medic whose face was so caked in dust and dried blood she was almost unrecognizable. A medic who had just spent 12 hours keeping 3 soldiers alive after their vehicle hit a pressure plate IED. He had looked her in the eye and said, "The courage of our medics is the bedrock of our army. Thank you, soldier." Anya remembered the weight of his handshake, the kindness in his tired eyes. Now, that same man lay on a table in OR3, his life in the hands of Adrian Thorne. From the start, Thorne was insufferable. He was performing the surgery using the Da Vinci surgical robot, not because it was medically necessary for this procedure, but because it was theatrical. He narrated his every move for the gallery, his voice piped through the OR's speaker system, a smooth, confident baritone. And now, we gently dissect the pericardium. Notice the precision, the bloodless field. It's like poetry, gentlemen. Pure poetry. The OR staff moved around him, their faces tense. They knew this arrogance. They knew the way he prioritized performance over process. The scrub nurse's brow was furrowed. The anesthesiologist kept his eyes glued to his monitors, his jaw tight. Anya was on her scheduled rotation, cleaning the exterior of the surgical suites. OR3 had a large double-paned observation window looking out into the sterile corridor. As she methodically wiped down the stainless steel frame, she could see the entire drama unfolding inside. She saw Thorne's swagger, the focused tension of his team, and the array of monitors displaying General Wallace's vital signs. The mistake, when it happened, was born of pure hubris. Thorne was boasting about the delicate process of grafting the saphenous vein. He turned his head slightly to address the gallery camera, his attention drifting from the magnified 3D image on his console for a fatal second. In that second, the robotic grasper, guided by his momentarily distracted hand, went a millimeter too deep. It nicked the ascending aorta. It wasn't a gentle tear. It was a puncture. On the monitor, a geyser of brilliant arterial red suddenly bloomed, obscuring the entire surgical field. Alarms shrieked to life, a cacophony of shrill, electronic panic. The patient's blood pressure, displayed in stark green numbers, began to plummet. 120/80, 90/60, 70/40. The poetry was over. "Bleeder!" Thorne yelled, his voice suddenly shrill. The smooth baritone was gone, replaced by the high-pitched terror of a man who had just driven his sports car off a cliff. "More suction! Get me more suction!" The scrub nurse slapped a suction tool into the waiting robotic arm's cannula, but it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. The chest cavity was filling with blood. "Get me a clamp! Aortic clamp! Now!" Thorne barked. But they couldn't clamp what they couldn't see. The field was a swirling vortex of red. "Someone call cardiothoracic backup!" he screamed, his hands flying uselessly over the console. "Get Dr. Evans! Get anyone!" The charge nurse's voice was tight with dread. "Backup is 20 minutes out, doctor. They're in a complex case in the north wing." 20 minutes. Anya looked at the monitor displaying the general's arterial line. The waveform was flattening. The numbers were catastrophic. 50/30. They didn't have 20 minutes. They had 3, maybe 4. Through the glass, she saw it all. She saw the blood. She saw the screaming alarms. She saw the panicked, useless fumbling of the staff. And she saw the face of Dr. Adrian Thorne. It was the face of a hollow man, a coward stripped bare, his arrogance dissolving into pure, unadulterated panic. She looked from Thorne's terrified face to the name on the digital board above the door. Wallace. R. Gen. The man who had thanked her. The man whose life was now draining away because of the ego of a peacock in scrubs. A countdown timer started in her head, a relic of a past she could never escape. 3 minutes to exsanguination. 2 minutes, 59 seconds. 58. She dropped her mop. The clatter of the metal handle hitting the polished linoleum floor was shockingly loud in the tense, sterile corridor. It was the sound of a decision being made. It was the sound of a ghost coming back to life. The world slowed to a crawl. For Anya, the frantic beeping of the failing monitors, the panicked shouts in the OR, all of it faded into a dull, distant roar. There was only the mission. Save the man on the table. The objective was clear. The timeline was critical. She didn't run. She moved. She hit the automatic door sensor with her shoulder, the rubber-edged doors hissing open to admit her. She stepped across the threshold from the grey, invisible world of the janitor into the stark, bright crisis of the operating room. Every head snapped towards her. For a moment, the chaos paused, replaced by a universal, stunned disbelief. It was the mop lady, in the middle of a code. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" Thorne shrieked, his face a blotchy mess of sweat and fury. Get out! Security! Anya didn't look at him. She didn't spare him a glance. Her eyes were locked on the monitors, absorbing the data with an intensity that seemed to burn. Blood pressure, 45/25 and falling. Heart rate, tachycardic, then bradycardic, a dying muscle fluttering in protest. The flatlining waveform of the arterial line. She had 90 seconds, maybe. She moved with a liquid grace that defied her worn uniform and the limp that was now completely, miraculously gone. It hadn't been a limp of weakness. It had been the gait of a body holding itself in reserve, a predator feigning injury. In 2 strides, she was at the central supply cart. She ripped off her grey, button-up janitor's shirt, tossing it aside. Underneath, she wore a simple, dark grey T-shirt, taut across a frame that was not frail, but coiled with lean, dense muscle. Her voice, when it came, was unrecognizable. The quiet, raspy monotone was gone, replaced by a voice of pure command, calm, clear, and absolute. It cut through the panic like a scalpel. "You," she said, her finger jabbing towards the head scrub nurse, a woman named Maria, who had never given her a second look. "Thoracotomy tray, right now, and get me a 4-0 proline suture on a tapered vascular needle, and 2 units of O-negative blood, wide open." Maria stared, paralyzed by confusion. "Now!" Anya commanded, and the force of that single word broke the spell. Maria scrambled to obey, her hands shaking. "You!" Anya's finger swiveled to the anesthesiologist, whose eyes were wide above his mask. "Push 1 milligram of epinephrine and hang a dopamine drip. Titrate to keep his mean arterial pressure above 60. I don't care how you do it, just do it." The anesthesiologist, a man with 30 years of experience, found himself nodding and turning to his drug cart without a single thought of protest. Anya turned to face Thorne, who stood babbling by the Da Vinci console. She walked directly to him. She didn't push him. She didn't scream. She reached out and placed a single, steady hand on the center of his chest. It was not a violent act, but it was an act of profound and undeniable authority. "Step aside, doctor," she said. Her voice was quiet now, almost a whisper, but it carried the chilling weight of a death sentence. "You're relieved." Thorne flinched, as if he'd been tasered. He looked down at her hand on his chest, then up at her eyes. The empty, placid gaze was gone. What looked back at him was something ancient and terrifying, something he had only ever seen in war movies. It was the look of a soldier who had seen the worst of humanity and was entirely unimpressed by him. He stumbled backward, away from the console, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Anya slid into the surgeon's seat. She didn't bother adjusting it. She leaned forward, her eyes going to the 3D viewer, her hands finding the master controls. For a moment, she was still, her head bowed as if in prayer. Then, her hands began to move. It wasn't surgery, it was artistry. The clumsy, panicked movements of Thorne were replaced by a blur of motion so fast, so precise, it seemed impossible. The robotic arms inside the general's chest, which had been flailing uselessly, now danced with an intelligence of their own. One arm, with a grasper, gently retracted the heart. Another, with the suction tool, cleared the blood, not with frantic slurping, but with a series of quick, strategic movements, creating a pocket of visibility around the aortic root. A third arm, holding a delicate pair of scissors, began to dissect the hematoma with millimeter precision. The bleeding, which had been a torrential flood, slowed to a manageable ooze. She was doing something no one in the room had ever seen. She wasn't just trying to clamp the aorta, she was performing a complex inflow occlusion technique, using the patient's own pericardium to temporarily patch the hole while she prepared to suture. It wasn't in any textbook. It was a battlefield improvisation, executed with the stunning elegance of a master. The room was dead silent, save for the slowly stabilizing beeps of the monitors. The pressure was creeping up. 60-40, 65-45. Everyone stared, their minds unable to reconcile the image of the mop lady with the virtuoso performance unfolding before them. They were witnessing a resurrection, not just of the patient on the table, but of the woman at the console. The human mind abhors a vacuum, especially one of power. Dr. Thorne's ego, having been shattered into a million pieces, began to desperately reassemble itself. The initial shock wore off, replaced by a tidal wave of incandescent rage and abject humiliation. This janitor, this filthy, invisible woman, had not only touched him, she had dismissed him. In his OR, in front of his staff, the sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was more than he could process. "Security!" he finally managed to roar, his voice cracking. "Get security in here now. Get this woman out of my operating room." He lunged forward, his face purple with fury, and grabbed Anya's shoulder, trying to physically haul her out of the surgeon's chair. "She's contaminated. She's going to kill him. She's a janitor." Anya didn't even flinch. Her eyes remained glued to the 3D display, her right hand continuing its impossibly delicate work on the aortic suture line. But her left hand, the one resting near the console's emergency stop button, moved. It shot out with the speed of a striking snake and clamped around Thorne's wrist. His breath hitched. The grip wasn't just strong, it was like having his wrist caught in a hydraulic press. The bones ground together under a pressure that was both excruciating and expertly controlled. It was the grip of someone who knew anatomy, not from a textbook, but from the grim, practical application of putting bodies back together and taking them apart. "Touch me again, doctor," Anya said, her voice a low, flat monotone that was far more terrifying than any shout. She still hadn't looked at him. "And I will personally intubate you with that floor lamp." The dark, shocking humor of the threat, delivered with the emotional content of a weather report, stunned him into silence. He tried to pull his wrist away, but it was like trying to fight granite. He was a child in her grasp. He froze, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. This wasn't just a strong woman, this was something else. Just as the immediate crisis seemed to be under control, a new set of alarms blared to life. This time, it was the cerebral oximeter and the EEG monitor. The waveforms, which had been faint but present, suddenly flattened into stark, terrifying lines. "She's stroking out," the anesthesiologist yelled, his voice strained. "Massive embolic event. She must have thrown a clot from the aortic injury. We have no brain activity." It was a disaster, layered on a catastrophe. They had saved him from bleeding to death, only to have him die of a massive stroke. The room's brief flicker of hope was extinguished. Anya's reaction was instantaneous. Damn it! The hypotension and the aortic manipulation must have dislodged a plaque thrombus. Her mind was a flurry of calculations. "We need to induce deep hypothermic circulatory arrest. Now." Maria, the scrub nurse, gasped. Ma'am, we can't. We're not equipped for that here. That's a full cardiac perfusion setup. We don't have the machinery, the heat exchangers." "I don't need a full setup," Anya snapped, her focus absolute. "We improvise. Get me every bag of sterile saline slush you have in the freezers, every single one. Pack the head and chest cavity completely. We're going to do a topical-induced cooling. It's crude, but it's our only shot to buy his brain some time." She looked at the anesthesiologist. "I need you to push propofol to burst suppression on the EEG, then shut it off. We're stopping his heart." "Stopping his heart?" Thorne whispered,
horrified.
"You're insane! That's murder!" Anya finally turned her head and looked at him. The full force of her glacial stare hit him. "No, doctor. What you did was attempted murder. What I'm doing is called a last resort. There's a difference. Now, are you going to help, or are you going to stand there and document the patient's time of death?" The staff was frozen, caught in an impossible dilemma. On one side was their chief of surgery, the man who signed their paychecks, screaming that this was madness. On the other was a janitor, who moments ago had performed a surgical miracle and was now issuing commands with the unshakable certainty of a battlefield commander. It was the young intern, Ben, who broke the spell. The same intern who had seen her stop the cart in the hallway. He looked at Thorne's panicked, useless fury and then at Anya's terrifying, absolute calm. He made a choice. He sprinted out of the OR. "I'll get the slush," he yelled over his shoulder.
That was all it took.
The spell was broken. Maria and another nurse ran to assist him. The anesthesiologist, after a moment's hesitation, began adjusting his drips, his voice now firm as he called out readings to Anya. The team had chosen its leader, and it wasn't Dr. Thorne. He was left standing alone, a king without a kingdom, watching in horror as a janitor prepared to stop a 4-star general's heart in a desperate, improbable bid to save his mind. Just as the first bags of icy saline slush were being brought into the room, the OR doors flew open. They didn't swish open politely. They were slammed inward with such force that they bounced off the rubber stoppers, the sound like a gunshot in the tense, focused room. In the doorway stood a figure that commanded instant silence. He was a man in his late 60s, ramrod straight, his face a roadmap of command and hard decisions. The 4 silver stars on each shoulder of his immaculate army dress uniform glittered under the surgical lights. It was General Marcus Thorne, no relation to the disgraced surgeon, but a man whose name carried 1,000 times more weight. He was flanked by 2 stone-faced colonels in their own dress uniforms, and trailing behind them, looking pale and utterly terrified, was the hospital's chief executive officer, a man named Davies. General Thorne had been in the CEO's office receiving the initial panicked report of a complication in General Wallace's surgery. His face was a thundercloud of controlled fury. He strode into the OR, his eyes sweeping the scene, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible tableau before him. He saw the open chest, the packed ice. He saw his friend and mentor, General Wallace, lying pale and still. He saw the nation's celebrated top doctor, Adrian Thorne, cowering against a far wall like a disciplined schoolboy. He saw the hospital staff moving with a frantic, desperate purpose, and at the center of it all, at the helm of the multi-million-dollar surgical robot, he saw a woman in a dirty gray t-shirt and janitor's pants, her back to him, her posture radiating an impossible degree of authority. "Davies," the general's voice, was a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the room. "What in the name of God is going on here? Who is this woman?" The CEO, slick with sweat, could only stammer. "General, we have a situation. It's complicated." Dr. Adrian Thorne saw his salvation. Here was authority.
Here was the cavalry.
"General!" he cried out, his voice shrill with a mixture of relief and vindication. "Thank God you're here! This woman, she's a janitor. She's insane. She assaulted me, took over the surgery, and now she's trying to kill him. Arrest her! For God's sake, arrest her!" General Thorne's gaze flickered to Adrian Thorne for a bare second, an expression of utter contempt on his face, before dismissing him completely. He ignored the outburst. His attention was fixed on the woman at the console. There was something in her posture, in the economical set of her shoulders, in the way her head was tilted as she studied the monitors. It was familiar. It resonated with a part of his brain that stored images of soldiers, of warriors, of the best he had ever served with. He took a step closer, his polished black shoes silent on the linoleum. He moved past the anesthesiologist, his eyes narrowing as he tried to get a better look at her face. He saw the faded, crescent-shaped scar just above her right eyebrow, mostly hidden by a stray lock of dark, sweat-dampened hair. He saw the impossible technique she had been using, now visible on the auxiliary monitor, a technique he had only ever read about in one highly classified after-action report. A flicker of stunned disbelief crossed his face, followed by a dawning, earth-shattering recognition. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a rifle bolt locking home. The location, the injury, the legend. It couldn't be, but it was. His voice, when he spoke, was barely a whisper, filled with a reverence that defied the entire situation. "Major Sharma, is that you?" The room, which had already been tense, went absolutely suffocatingly silent. Every sound, the hum of the vents, the last few beeps of the monitors before they were silenced, seemed to vanish. The air itself felt like it had crystallized. Anya didn't look up from her console. Her focus was absolute. She made one final, minute adjustment to the cooling cannulas. "Just a minute, sir," she said, her voice calm and professional, almost ready to arrest. The casual procedural dismissal of a four-star general by a woman in a janitor's uniform was the single most shocking thing anyone in that room had ever witnessed. CEO Davies looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Dr. Thorne's jaw was hanging open. Anya finished her task. She straightened up in the chair, her shoulders slumping for a fraction of a second, with a weariness that seemed bone deep. She finally turned, her face pale and drawn, and looked at the general. And General Marcus Thorne, in the middle of a catastrophic medical emergency, in front of the hospital's CEO and a room full of stunned civilians, did something that defied all protocol. He straightened his back, brought his heels together with an audible click, and raised his right hand in a sharp, perfect salute. "Major Anya Sharma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is an honor to see you again." The unspoken sound of jaws hitting the floor echoed through the silent room. The salute hung in the air, a stunning, incomprehensible gesture. A four-star general, a titan of the American military, saluting a janitor. The world had tilted on its axis. Anya met his gaze, a flicker of the old life, the old self, passing through her tired eyes. She gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, the closest she could come to returning the salute. "Sir," she acknowledged, her voice still quiet, but now resonating with the authority he had just bestowed upon her. Then the general dropped his hand and turned. The warmth and reverence in his face vanished, replaced by an arctic cold that seemed to lower the temperature in the room more than the bags of saline slush. His eyes, like chips of blue ice, locked onto Dr. Adrian Thorne. "You," he growled, taking a single, predatory step forward. "You said, arrest her?" Adrian Thorne visibly shrank, pressing himself against the wall as if trying to merge with it. I, she's a janitor. I didn't know," he stammered, his voice a pathetic whimper. "You didn't know," the general repeated, his voice a low, scathing whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "You're right. You didn't know. You didn't know that you were in the presence of Major Anya Ghost Sharma, United States Army, 75th Ranger Regiment, Special Operations Combat Medic. You didn't know that her call sign was Ghost because she could move through hell itself to get to her wounded and pull them back from the dead. You didn't know that this janitor is credited with 172 confirmed saved lives in active combat zones." He took another step. Thorne was trembling now, a fine sheen of sweat on his face.
You didn't know,
The general continued, his voice rising with each revelation, that she pioneered the very surgical technique she just used to save that man's life. It's called the Sharma flap, an emergency field repair for catastrophic aortic tears. She developed it in the middle of a sandstorm, in the back of a burning Humvee, using sterilized fishing line and the blade from a multi-tool. An act for which she was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration that can be given to a member of the United States Army. The general was now standing directly in front of Thorne, his towering presence eclipsing him entirely. The two colonels behind him stood like stone sentinels, their expressions grim. "The woman you tried to have arrested," the general's voice dropped back to a deadly quiet, "holds a qualifications so advanced, so elite, that there are only 5 other people in the entire armed forces who share it. She has forgotten more about trauma surgery than you will ever learn. Now, tell me again what you did, Doctor." He spat the last word like it was a poison. Thorne's collapse was total. It was not just a loss of composure, it was the disintegration of a man's entire identity.
the handsome face crumpled,
The arrogance dissolving into a puddle of pure terror and self-pity. "I didn't know," he sobbed, the words bubbling out of him. "She just cleans the floors. I didn't know." The general's expression hardened further, if that was even possible. "She cleans floors because this hospital, this country, had no place for her after her career was ended. She cleans floors because her convoy was hit by a command-detonated IED that killed her entire team and sent a 2-pound piece of shrapnel through her femur." He jabbed a finger toward Anya. "That limp you and your staff have no doubt mocked her for? That's what's left of a hero's sacrifice." He leaned in, his face inches from Thorne's. "You let a national hero scrub the filth from your floors while you played God in this room and nearly killed one of the finest men I've ever known. You are not a doctor. You are a disgrace to your profession, to this hospital, and to the human species." Adrian Thorne made a gut-wrenching gagging sound and began to slide down the wall, his expensive scrubs pooling around him as he dissolved into a heap of pathetic, racking sobs. The public humiliation was absolute, witnessed by the very people he had spent years tormenting and lording over. His reign was over, not with a bang, but with a pitiful, whimpering collapse. The mop lady had dethroned the king, and his castle had crumbled to dust around him. In the aftermath, a controlled professional calm descended upon OR3. General Thorne had made a single, terse call on his satellite phone, and within 15 minutes, a new team, A specialized military critical care air transport team had arrived, seemingly out of nowhere. They moved with the quiet, unnerving efficiency of true experts, taking over the care of General Wallace, following Anya's precise, verbal instructions for transport with reverent attention. Maintain core temperature at 28 degrees for the next 12 hours before initiating slow rewarming, Anya dictated, her voice weary but firm. Continue burst suppression with the propofol. He'll need a full neuro workup and a follow-up cardiac MRI as soon as he's stable. The aortic repair is temporary. It will need to be reinforced with a graft once he's off bypass. The team's lead physician, a full colonel, listened and nodded, taking notes like a resident. Understood, Major. The original OR staff lingered, now relegated to the periphery. They stood in a state of collective shock, their faces a canvas of shame, awe, and disbelief. Nurse Brenda, who had laughed at Anya in the cafeteria just yesterday, stared at her with wide, wet eyes, her face pale. She looked like she had seen a religious apparition. The young intern, Ben, watched Anya with an expression of pure, unadulterated hero worship. They had all been blind, and now they could see. The truth was more blinding than the surgical lights. As General Wallace was carefully wheeled out, his body encased in a network of tubes and cooling blankets, General Marcus Thorne approached Anya. The thunderous fury was gone from his face, replaced by a deep, weary respect. He stood before her, not as a general to a major, but as one human being to another. Anya, he said, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. We've been looking for you. For 2 years. You just vanished. He shook his head, a look of frustration and regret on his face. The paperwork for your Medal of Honor was approved by the Joint Chiefs 18 months ago. The President wants to award it to you himself, but we couldn't find you. Your records were sealed at your request. You fell off the face of the earth. Anya looked down at her hands. They bore the faint, reddish indentations from the surgical console's controls. A fine tremor had returned to them, the adrenaline of the crisis finally ebbing away. I wasn't looking for a medal, sir, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I just wanted some quiet. After everything. I understand, the general said, and he truly did. He saw the bone-deep exhaustion in her, the toll of a war that had followed her home. He reached out and placed a heavy, gentle hand on her shoulder. But the quiet is over, Major. The world can't afford for you to be quiet. This country needs people like you. I need people like you. He paused, his gaze shifting to the now empty operating table. I'm putting together a new unit, he said, his voice regaining some of its command. A rapid deployment forward surgical team, small, agile, the absolute best of the best, capable of setting up a fully functional OR anywhere in the world in under an hour. It's a project I've been fighting for years. He looked back at her, his eyes intense. I'm not asking you to lead it, Anya. I'm begging you. He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the desire to retreat back into the shadows. He played his final card. The man you just saved, he said quietly, General Wallace, Wally. He was my first commanding officer when I was a boot lieutenant in the 82nd Airborne. He's the man who signed my commission papers. You didn't just save a VIP, you saved the man who made me who I am. Anya looked around the room, at the discarded slush bags, the blood-stained cloths, the silent, gleaming robot. She looked at the faces of the staff, their expressions of shame and awe. She looked at the life she had pulled back from the brink. The quiet hadn't healed her. It had just been a place to hide. Maybe the general was right. Maybe the quiet was over.
A slow, deliberate nod.
"I'll do it," she said, "but I'll need my own team, hand-picked, and my own protocols. No compromises." A slow, broad smile finally broke through the general's stern facade, lighting up his entire face. "Major Sharma," he said, his voice booming with relief and triumph, "you'll have whatever you damn well please." 6 months later, a news report played on a large screen in a bustling airport terminal. The face of a haggard, broken Adrian Thorne filled the screen. A well-coiffed anchorwoman narrated his downfall in a somber voice. Stripped of his medical license in all 50 states, Dr. Adrian Thorne is now facing over a dozen high-profile malpractice lawsuits, as well as a potential criminal investigation for felony negligence. His fall from grace has sent shockwaves through the medical community. The footage cut to Thorne being mobbed by reporters outside a courthouse, his expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of despair.
He whimpered,
No comment, as his lawyer shoved him into the back of a car. Metropolitan General Hospital had been publicly censured and was still reeling from the scandal. The smarmy CEO, Mr. Davies, had been fired in a public spectacle. In a desperate act of damage control and genuine atonement, the board had funded a new, state-of-the-art trauma wing. A polished brass plaque at its entrance read, "The Major Anya Sharma Center for Advanced Trauma and Field Medicine." Inside that wing, Nurse Brenda was now the head clinical educator, humbled and fiercely dedicated. She often told the story to new residents, her voice full of awe, of the day the mop lady saved the hospital, ensuring that no one would ever again mistake a uniform for the person wearing it. Thousands of miles away, on a dusty, sun-baked tarmac at a classified airbase in the Horn of Africa, the world was a different color. The air shimmered with heat rising from the concrete.
a C-17.
Globemaster, a massive grey beast of an aircraft, sat with its rear cargo ramp down, ready to swallow the team preparing beside it. The team was small, just 6 people, all clad in cutting-edge, black tactical medical gear. They moved with the silent, fluid economy of professionals at the absolute peak of their craft. They were checking packs, calibrating portable diagnostic devices, their faces calm and focused. A figure appeared from the base operations building, walking toward the plane. It was Anya Sharma. She wore a crisp, black tactical uniform, devoid of rank insignia save for the specialized medical crest on her collar. The uniform was tailored to a body that was now strong and confident. The limp was gone, managed by a discreet, high-tech carbon fiber brace hidden beneath her pants. The tremor in her hands was gone, vanquished by a renewed sense of purpose. She moved with an unshakable, quiet authority that needed no announcement. Tinned to the front of her body armor, polished and gleaming in the harsh sun, was the tarnished Special Operations Combat Medic badge that had once lived in a dented lunchbox. As she approached, her team, a hand-picked group of the finest medics, surgeons and nurses drawn from every branch of the Special Forces, snapped to attention. Anya came to a stop before them, her eyes scanning each of their faces. Her voice, when she spoke, was the same one that had cut through the panic in OR3, calm, clear, and in absolute command. "Wheels up in 5, she said. "Intel says a diplomatic convoy was ambushed in the mountains. Multiple critical casualties, hostile territory. It's bad." A small, grim smile touched her lips. "Let's go save some lives." Without another word, she turned and walked up the steep ramp into the cavernous belly of the C-17. Her team followed without hesitation. Just before she disappeared into the shadows of the aircraft, Anya paused at the top of the ramp. She turned and looked back out at the sprawling, harsh landscape, at the world that was once again her operating room. She was no longer hiding in the quiet corners. She was no longer invisible. The ghost medic was back, and she wasn't cleaning floors anymore. True worth is not found in the title on a door, the brand of a suit, or the volume of a voice. It is forged in the crucible of sacrifice, measured by the hands that serve when others flee, and defined by the quiet courage that acts when all hope seems lost. Look closer at the quiet ones, the invisible ones who move through the world unseen, for it is often they who carry the greatest strength. The world is not saved by the loud and the proud, but by the humble and the competent, and they are everywhere.